system in Holland. In 87, he dies, and he is one of the first Dutch citizens to be cremated, which is a little thing to say, but it shows how Multatuli had left his original Mennonite background. But although born in a Mennonite family, and also the fact that Multatuli didn't consider himself to be a Christian, so that's why he was cremated, yet we can find, I think, in his work and in his thinking some Mennonite traces. First of all, the ethics of Multatuli or Douwes-Dekker. In line with the Dutch liberal Mennonite tradition, Multatuli considered that deeds are beyond words. So his personal engagement was to him very much more important than politics. He never became a socialist like many of his friends, and he firmly believed that only an inner ethical conversion of leadership could change the world. And like Jesus, he vehemently criticized religious and ecclesial hypocrisy, as becomes evident at the end of his most famous, I think, story on Saitya and Adinda that we will read and play in some minutes. Secondly, there is, I think, some Mennonite influence in Multatuli's spirituality. He is very much inspired by the German Romantic literary movement, especially by Heinrich Heine. So Multatuli in Indonesia, but also in Europe, longed for natural beauty and purity. And especially, we must say, he had a sense for the beauty of the female sex. Like Spinoza, Multatuli identified God with nature and with necessity. And he identified Jesus with some kind of romantic, spiritual individual. He saw in Jesus a non-conformist rebel. He strived for authentic self-expressions and believed that every individual possessed his or her personal genius. You could also see in his work that Multatuli suffered from something like a mystical homesickness. He has written a prayer of the ignorant because he doesn't know to whom he is praying. Het gebed van de onwetende. And there he writes, I would have liked to obey to your will, not because of fear for punishment or hope for any reward, but just like any child does what his father wants him to do. I would have liked to obey to your will out of love. But thou kept silence. Always thou kept silence. So then this famous book, Max Havelaar, Multatuli wrote in 1860 in Brussels. I'll give a very brief, of course, impression of the book. Since koffiebroker Batavus Droogstoppel, which is a non-existing Dutch name and has a kind of cynical connotation. Since koffiebroker Batavus Droogstoppel had met an old class friend whom he calls Sjaalman, though his proper name is Max Havelaar. This koffiebroker had the ambition to write an economic study on the coffee business in Dutch India. Havelaar handed him a bunch of written notes and he charges Droogstoppel, his German servant, and Droogstoppel charges his German servant Ernst Stern to write a book on the basis of these notes Havelaar took on his stay in Indonesia. But instead of a serious study on coffee, this servant Stern produces a novel that talks about Havelaar's responsibilities, adventures, and social engagements as an assistant resident in Lebak in Java, so in this difficult area in Indonesia. In an important passage, the discourse to the responsible chiefs of Lebak, Havelaar stresses the necessity to bring an end to the social economic injustice imposed on the populations, both by the Dutch colonial governors and by the Indonesian rulers. And then there is this famous story about a destroyed love between two young people, Saidja and Adinda. It illustrates the cruelty and the perversity of the colonialist system. Of course, such social critique didn't fit well into the original writing ambitions of Droogstoppel, who was a coffee broker and wanted to write about the capitalistic advantage of trading in coffee. And how angry this Droogstoppel, this coffee broker, would have been if he had known that today the name Max Havelaar is an international brand for fair coffee trading. Now we go to the story or fairy tale of Saidja and Adinda. Again, this is for Dutch children a must-have in school. After the first time that the district chief had stolen his buffalo, and after his wife died from grief, Saidja's father didn't have anything to sell anymore. Poverty waited him, and so he fled away from his home village, leaving behind his son, Saidja. Second phase, Saidja decides to search work in Batavia in order to earn money, in order to come back with a new buffalo, and in order to marry his neighbor girl, Adinda, with whom he is in love and whom tradition has destined to him. Adinda will wait 36 moons for her future husband, and then they will meet on a particular spot. After 3 years, Saidja returns back to his village. With money, he succeeded, and with even a true kris. This is this Indonesian magic knife, you can say. On his way back, he imagines a sunny future. But once arrived, unfortunately, Adinda doesn't appear on the spot. And he discovers later that her house has been destroyed. Where is Adinda? The last part of the fairy tale or the tragedy, Saidja learns the story. The buffalo of Adinda's father had been stolen by the colonialist officials, and Adinda's father decided to leave with his whole family in order to join a bunch of refugees and rebels against the colonial governors. So Saidja decides to follow them. And he joins, in order to find his beloved girlfriend, he joins the rebels and discovers, unfortunately, the dead bodies of Adinda's family, and finally also that of Adinda herself. She had been raped. So then he takes the decision himself to battle the Dutch and the Indonesians oppressors, and soon he dies. This whole story, which is a love story, a tragic love story in Indonesia, ends then with a cynical description of a Dutch church service where the pastor thanks God for the richness this colony in Indonesia gives to the true believers in the north. Nina.
All right. Thank you, Chris. What we're going to do next is we're going to watch a short segment from a movie version of Max Havelaar, which was made in 1976, I believe.
Yep.
And this will offer a little bit of a taste of what this story is. We've picked particularly the portion that ties in with that story of Saija and Adinda. And then, so watch this. We're going to watch about 8 to 10 minutes of it. And then after that, we're going to split into some time for independent reading. And then we'll each take responsibility for a little part of the text to do a reader's theater together. Because we're not allowed to do breakout rooms, as it turns out, I'm going to assign every person a small part of the text, if you're comfortable with that. So watch the film for now, just enjoy it. And as you do that, if you'd like to, please check the chat now. You'll see I've put a PDF of this chapter for our next activity in the chat. Can you all check if you can see that and try and download it for yourself onto your computer? Is there anyone who doesn't see the chat? I can also try and add the comment one more time. I think everyone's been here since the time that I uploaded it. Great. If anyone can't access the PDF, can you please let me know? And then I'll post it again there. But for now, I'm gonna put on the film here, and then I'll explain our reading activity after that. Can everyone see and hear it? Can I get a thumbs up if you can hear? You can hear and see. Great.
pantang membunuhnya. Kan betul, ada pusar kembar dalam bulunya.
Aku akan mengobati kau dengan obat yang mujarab.
Saya takut tidak kamu dari dekat. Iya, kebetulan kita lihat.
Dilawan terus sama
Jangan
Semodel Raja Sawah.
Jangan. Lebih baik beri nama dia pahlawan. Kan lebih bagus.
Tapi kamu tahu waktu ditahir.
Bupati tidak senang pada kalian. Kalian belum memberikan pundutan padanya. Itu haknya.
Juragan, kami punya ayam dan beras. Kami akan mempersembahkannya.
Ayam, beras. Apakah itu pantas? Kalian mau bikin malu bupati?
Juragan, kami tidak punya apa-apa. Tidak punya uang, apapun tidak.
Betul. Itu apa?
Juragan, kalau tidak ada kerbau lagi, bagaimana saya membajak sawah?
Apakah kalian ingin bupati malu di depan rakyatnya?
Sini, sini. Kasih, serahkan kerbau itu. Cepat, cepat.
Ayah,
Cepat serahkan.
saja.
Kembalikan si Pantang. Kembalikan. Kembalikan.
God, in zijn onnaspeurlijke wijsheid, heeft aan een land, klein van omvang, maar groot en sterk, door de kennissen Gods, macht gegeven over de bewoners dier gewesten, opdat zij door het evangelium gered worden van de straffen der helle. Gemeente, ik wil u noemen de plichten die wij hebben ten aanzien van de miljoenen en miljoenen afvallige schepselen Gods die de eilanden des Indische Oceaans bewonen. In de eerste plaats het geven van ruime bijdragen in geld voor de zendingsvereniging. Ten tweede, het ondersteunen der bijbelgenootschappen om bijbels op Java uit te delen. In de derde plaats, het schrijven van preken en gezangen, geschikt om door soldaten en matrozen aan de Javanen te worden voorgelezen en voorgezongen. Want, geliefden, God is de God van liefde. En daarom is Nederland uitverkoren om van die rampzaligen te redden wat er te redden is.
All right. Can you all hear me? Yeah. So that's just a very short excerpt of this movie version of the book. And as you can see, a whole lot of different difficult themes to do with colonialism, with trade, with abuses of power, with the connection between church and state, and so forth. What I want us to do now, as we process these ideas and some of the historical background that Chris and I have shared, is I'd like you all to open up the PDF that was in the chat. And we're going to do a slightly adjusted version of this Reader's Theatre activity, since we can't do the breakout rooms today. But what we will do is I'll give everyone some time to skim through the chapter. You've already heard from Chris the basic points of that story of Saija and Adinda, but please do feel free to read it for yourself again and get a sense of the content and writing style. And in particular, I'll ask you to focus on the portion of the text that you'll be thinking about for the Reader's Theatre component. After you've looked at the text and read it carefully, I want you to think about the key themes in your portion of the text and try and work out how you could devise that into a short script for yourself that you can read out as a Reader's Theatre once we come back together. And since we can't do breakout groups, what I think will work well is if we assign a short section to everyone here who's comfortable doing that. So I see there's 13 participants, 11 now. So we'll divide it into much shorter chunks, and you can each think about a page and a half or 2 pages and pluck out those key ideas to narrate for the rest of the group. Then we'll have the whole story read out for ourselves to think about. Does that sound good to everyone here? And I appreciate there's maybe some people who feel uncomfortable with public speaking or sharing in that way. If you'd rather not actually participate, that's also fine. But if you are willing to, then I'm going to split up these pages now between everyone here who's interested in doing that. Let's see here. For the moment, I'm going to stop share so we can all see each other. Very nice.
Ich glaube, wir machen einfach eine eigene Gruppe und die anderen sind zusammen groß genug für eine Gruppe, oder? Christina, willst du das kurz übersetzen? Oder ich kann auch im Englisch. Ja. Hi, I think we're the only Germans, so my suggestion would be that we basically, like you all can be one group in English, and we'll be a German group.
That sounds good. Okay, so do you want to download that text for yourself?
Yeah.
And unfortunately, that is in English. Will reading it in English be okay? So take some time to read for yourself, and then if you can think of a way to present that in German in just sort of 8 minutes or so, then that would be great. And for the English group here, who here is comfortable taking part with a small presentation of part of the text after? Yes, yes. Great. Better question, does anyone not want to? Okay, great. So I think everyone's on board. That is wonderful. So that means we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people here. So what I will ask is, can I have one volunteer to do the group 1 part? It'll be about the first 5 or so pages. Could I ask? Oh, Kathy, thank you. So you'll be group 1 in a minute. I'll send you those page numbers in just a second. Can I ask Josh, would you be willing to do group 2? And Alan, group 3? I think you're on mute, Alan. Oops. Cheryl, group 4?
Alan, I will unmute you.
Okay.
This is Heidi. I may need to leave a little early, so could I be group 4 instead, or not the very last one?
Oh, sure. Did you want to share group 1 with Kathy? And I'll split those page numbers in 2. So we'll do for group 1, how about if Kathy, you do pages 255 to 257? And then we'll have Heidi do pages 258 to 259 top paragraph. So I'll send these details again in just a minute. And then Josh will be group 2, Alan group 3, and Cheryl group 4. Does that sound good? All right, so in just a second, I'm going to paste those page numbers again into the chat here so you can easily see how that divides up. And Kathy and Heidi, you'll be splitting that first group part. So what we'll do now is feel free to turn your camera off and just read for yourself. That's more comfortable, I think, to have some quiet time for that. We have a little bit of a time crunch here, so I'm going to suggest to take about 20 minutes, maybe 30 minutes altogether for reading and preparing a very short version of that portion of your text as a script that you can read out to the group afterwards. So read your pages and then prepare, I would say, 2 to 3 minute version of that story that you can read dramatically to the rest. Does that sound good? I think so, because the cameras are off. Perfect. Well, good luck with your reading, and I will post those page numbers in here for you again. And we look forward to coming back together at 1:15 to share what we've come up with. All right, can I ask everyone to join me back here in plenary? Cheryl, are you there too?
I'm here.
Great. So I hope you all enjoyed this very quick dash through the story of Saya and Adinda. What we're going to do now is dive right into our performance for each other. So I think what will work best is if the German group can perform for each other for the next 2 minutes. And no? Okay, or the German group could possibly listen to the English presentations?
Wir haben es nicht, wir haben uns mit Diskussionen aufgehalten.
Okay.
Okay.
So what we'll do then is...
Good. You got what I was trying to say.
I'm not sure if I did. I don't speak German, but I think I understood.
We discussed the topic and didn't do the exercise as is typical of us.
Okay, well, that's fair. So what we'll do then is we'll start with the English performance, and we'll do that seamlessly, moving from group to group. So feel free to start with group 1, and just once you stop, the next group should unmute and start. And just before we begin, Ileana, can you confirm that this is being filmed at this moment? So we have the whole thing as a little souvenir we can send around after if we want to. That's great. Well, without further ado, I will ask group 1 to begin their reader's theater for us. And if you're not presenting, please put yourself on mute just so we can fully enjoy the presentation. Please go ahead, group 1, for this Multatuli reading of this story.
Saja's father enters. Saja, are you okay? You haven't said anything for days since our buffalo was taken. Saja, I'm worried about you. Saja's father was worried for the whole family. Their buffalo helped them work their rice fields. No buffalo meant less rice. Less rice meant less income. Less money meant he might not be able to pay the tax to their district chief, the one who had stolen their buffalo in the first place. His father sighed, injustice everywhere. What could he do? Finally, Saja's father went home and got his only treasure, a small knife called a kris. It wasn't really a treasure. It was only worth about 2 pounds in British coin, but it was enough to buy another buffalo. They would be okay for now. Saja became friends with the new buffalo. Because they worked so well together in the rice field, Saja often won the friendly plowing competitions between his family and Adinda's family. Adinda was to be his wife one day. Mind you, the second buffalo was not nearly as competent as the first, but Saja cared for it nonetheless. One day, Saja's buffalo came to a standstill and wouldn't move. The boy called and pleaded with it, but it still stood stock still. Then he heard the cries of Adinda, "Tiger, run, Saja, run!" But he couldn't get away fast enough. After he'd gotten the yoke off his buffalo's neck, it stood over Saija's shaking body, and the tiger pounced. The brave buffalo impaled the big cat with its horns, but not before the tiger got in a few gouges with its great claws. Then the tiger fell to the earth, never to harm another. Saija was beside himself with relief, as was his whole family. His mother tended the wounds of the great buffalo with care. She hoped it knew somehow how grateful she was that it had saved her son. When the buffalo and Saija were considered strong enough to return to work, they went back out into the rice fields. Shortly after this, the district chief returned to their village, demanding a tax yet again. A second time, the unjust district chief took the only resource the family had, their beloved buffalo. As the mother watched it led away, likely to slaughter, she hoped with all her heart that the animal did not blame her for its fate. What would they do now?
I'm not sure what page we're on. Sorry, we overlapped with our preparation. Let's see. Go on to page 260, I think.
Okay, does group 2 want to go ahead?
Heidi's second,
We overlapped. I prepared page 258 and 9, but that
I'm so sorry, Heidi.
Covered. So go on. That's fine.
Stole your thunder.
We can also hear it twice. That's also fine.
I think just go on. Yeah.
Okay. Josh, do you want to go ahead with part 2?
Sure. So picking up just a little bit later, Saija's father fled the country, fearing retribution for not paying his land tax, having nothing to pledge against the price of a new buffalo. His parents, after all, had been nothing but village farmers. Saija's mother died of a broken heart, and that was when his father fled the region, only to be caught, brought back, and beaten, flogged with rattan for leaving without a pass. They brought him back and then left him in jail, considered him mad, a danger to himself or the community. But he wasn't there for long. He soon died. Saija's siblings, who knows what happened to them? His house, just bamboo and palm leaves, is now just a little spot of dirt and dust, covering up one more indistinct spot of suffering in Labak. Saija planned bigger things. He would go to Batavia, become a bendy boy for the rich gentleman. He had heard he could make real money in such service, as long as he behaved himself. 3 years, maybe, and it could be enough money to buy 2 buffaloes. He entered Adinda's house with a swagger to tell her, right after her father had left, all about his plans. Just think when I return. We will be old enough to marry, and I will have 2 buffaloes. Wonderful, Saija. I will be very pleased to marry you. I shall spin and weave sarongs and batik cloths and work hard all the time. Yes, but what if I come back and find you already married? Saija, you know perfectly well I will marry no one else. My father promised me to your father to marry you. Yes, but what do you want? I will marry you. When I come back, wait for me. Wait for me under the katapan tree where you gave me the melody flower. Wait for me there. How will I know when to wait? Count the moons. I will be away 36 moons. Count 36 moons, and then I will be waiting for you under the katapan tree. I promise to be there. Yes, Saija, I will be there. I will be there. Saija left her Adinda a strip of his turban, and then he walked away. He walked many days through fields and past magnificently large cities with so many houses built of stone and roofed with tiles. He had never seen anything like this before. At Tangerang, he bathed in the river and stayed with an acquaintance of his father, who taught him to weave straw hats, a useful skill for a young man seeking to make money. And now he felt so lonely, so far from Adinda. His great plans had taken up all his attention before, but now, many days away from her, he felt such great sorrow. It weighed on him, and he almost turned back, but what would Adinda think? And so he walked on. His mind spun as he thought of her until his sorrows became a song. And then there's a long poem in the text, which I'm not going to read. Finally, he arrived in Batavia, where he found a gentleman who took him into service as a groom. There, Saija grew strong and tall, with meals every day. He was popular with the servants and with the master, so much so that he soon became a houseboy, constantly receiving gifts and presents.
Thank you. Alan, please go ahead.
Okay. See, that was 264. Okay, well, Saija arrived in Batavia. He asked the gentleman to take his service as a groom, which the gentleman promptly did because he didn't understand Saija's language, which is Sundanese. For in Batavia, people like to have servants who had not yet learned Malay, and consequently are not so corrupted as others who had been longer in contact with European civilizations. Saija learned Malay, and he behaved like an exemplary manner, for he had never ceased to think of the two buffaloes he wanted to buy and of Adinda. He grew tall and strong because he ate every day, which is not always possible at Padua. He was popular, but certainly not have been rejected. But then soon he was promoted to the position of a houseboy, and his wages were raised, and he was constantly being given presents. For people were extremely satisfied with his work. The mistress of the house read Sue's novel, The Wandering Jew, 9 Days' Wonder, could not help thinking that Prince Jalma when she saw Saija. And the young ladies also understood better than before why the Japanese painter Radin Saleh had such a vogue in Paris. But they thought Saija ungrateful when, after nearly 3 years, he gave notice and asked for a certificate of good conduct. They couldn't refuse him this. So he set out for his native village with joyful heart. He passed Pisang not long before Saija, but Saija didn't know. And if he had known, he carried in his soul quite different things to occupy him. He counted the treasures he was taking home. In a bamboo roll he had as his pass and his master's testimonial. In a small cylindrical case attached to the leather strap, something heavy seemed to be constantly nudging his shoulder, but he felt it. And no wonder, in it were 30 Spanish dollars, enough to buy 3 buffaloes. What would Adinda say? And that's not all. And on his back, he could be seen. He could see the silver-mounted sheath of a cuirass, which he carried in his belt. The hilt was undoubtedly of finely carved kumuning, and he had wrapped it mostly carefully in a piece of silk. And he had still more treasures. In the knot of his loincloth, he kept a woman's girdle of broad silver links with a gold ikatbending or clasp. But to be sure, the girdle was short, but she was so slender, Adinda. And hanging from the thin cord of his vest beneath the vest, his neck beneath the vest carried a little silk bag containing some dried melati flour. Was it surprising that he tarried no longer at Tangerang and was necessary to visit the friend of his father who had made such fine straw hats? Was it surprising that he had little to say to the girls he met on the road? Was it surprising he no longer thought Serang was so splendid, and now that he had come to know Batavia, that he no longer crept away into the pagar as he had done 3 years ago when the resident drove past? Was it surprising he paid little attention to the stories of his fellow travelers who walked part way with him? he had scarcely listened when they told him the attempts to grow coffee had been entirely abandoned. The divisional center was now Rangkas Bitung, that a new assistant resident had arrived because the previous one had died a few months ago. No, he had a sweeter visions before his mind's eye. He scanned the clouds of the Katapan tree, for he was still too far off to see it at Badur. He clutched at the surrounding air as though wishing to embrace the form he would find waiting for him under that tree. He pictured himself to Adinda's face, her head, her shoulder. He saw the heavy conde, so black and glossy, caught in its own snare hanging down her neck. He saw her great eyes, lustrous in dark reflection, the nostrils she had so hotly wrinkled as a child whenever he teased her. How was it possible? And the corner of her mouth in which she stored a smile. She saw her breast, which by now would be swelling under the kabaya. And he saw how the sarong, which she herself had woven, tightly sheathed her hips and followed the curve of her thigh, descended past the knee in exquisite undulation to her small foot. No, he heard but little of what people had said to him. He heard quite different tones. He heard Adinda say, "Welcome to you, Saija. I have thought of you while spinning and weaving and while pounding rice in a block that carries thrice 12 notches made by my hand. Here am I under the Katapan on the first day of the new moon. Welcome to you, Saija. I will be your wife." That was the music which sounded so delicious in his ear and made him deaf to all the news the people told him on the way. At last, he saw the Katapan. Or rather, he saw a great dark patch which hid many stars from his eyes. That could only be the Jati wood, near the tree where he was to see Adinda again at sunrise tomorrow. He searched in the dark, feeling with his hands the trunks of many trees. It was not long before he found a familiar roughness of the south side of one, and he put his finger into the slit which Sipante had hacked in with his parang to exorcise the Pontianak, who was responsible for the toothache of Pante's mother shortly before his little brother was born. This was the Katapan, Saija sought. Yes, this was indeed the spot where he had seen Adinda for the first time, with other eyes than the rest of the playfellows. He sat at the root of the tree, looked up at the stars, and he wondered whether Adinda would now be asleep, and whether she had correctly marked the moons in her rice block. It would grieve him deeply if she had missed one, as though she had not been. They had not been enough, 6 and 30. And he wondered whether she had batiked pretty sarongs and slendangs. He also asked himself with some curiosity who might now be living in his father's house. And his childhood came back to him, his mother, and how the buffalo had saved him from the tiger. And he could not help musing on what might have become of Adinda if the buffalo had been Muslim staunch. For she would be sure to come at the first gleam. Yes, she would already be there in the gray of the early dawn. Oh, why had she not come to the tree the day before? It grieved him that she had not anticipated it, the glorious moment which had shone before him with ineffable radiance for 3 long years. And unjust as he was in the selfishness of his love, it seemed to him Adinda should have been there, waiting for him, who now complained, and before the appointed time at that, because he had to wait for her. He complained without cause. The sun still had not risen. To be sure, the stars were paling up there above his head, mortified over the approaching end of their reign. To be sure, strange colors streamed across the summits of the mountains, which looked darker and more sharply as they were outlined against the lighter background. But they vanished again, seemingly to drop down behind the incomprehensible curtain that continued to veil the day from Saija's eyes. And nevertheless, it grew gradually lighter and lighter around him, He could make it clear. He could already make out the tufted crest of the klapa wood in which Badur lies hidden, and there slept Adinda. No, she slept longer. How could she sleep? She did not. Did she not know Saija would be waiting for her? Assuredly, she had not slept at all that night. Doubtless, the village watchman had knocked at the door to ask why the pelita was still burning in her little house. With a sweet laugh, she told him that a vow was keeping her up to finish weaving the selendang which she was working on. She had to be ready for the first day of the new moon. Or she had spent the night in darkness, sitting on her rice block and counting with eager fingers to make sure there really were 36 deep notches carved into it side by side. And she had amused herself with the pretense of fright, imagining that she might have miscounted and perhaps one of them was still wanting. So that again, yet again, over and over, she could revel in the glorious certainty that without a shadow of a doubt, thrice 12 moons had passed since she had last seen Saija. Then came the streak of bluish red that fastened on the clouds, and the rims lit up, glowed. The lightning flashed, and once again the fiery arrows shot through the air. But this time they did not fall. They fixed themselves firmly in the dark background and shed their glow around them in wider and wider circles. Oh God, that was the dawn. That was the coming of Adinda. Saija never learned to pray, and it would have been a pity to teach him, for holier prayer and more fervent thanksgiving than were found in the speechless ecstasy of his soul could not have been impressed him. He did not want to go to Badur. To see Adinda again appeared to him less glorious than to be sure of seeing her again. He made himself comfortable at the foot of the katapan. Nature smiled on him, and just as a mother depicts the joy of deliberately recalling past sorrow, by showing what she had preserved as a keepsake during her child's absence, so did Saija delight himself by looking again at so many spots that he had witnessed, that had witnessed episodes in his short life. And over there on the other side, where the clump of coconut palms waved above the huts in the village, somewhere there, Siunta had fallen from a tree and died. No one came along the path that led from Badur to the Katapan, but she would come by and by. It was still very early. And anon, his impressions took the form of words. He sang what was passing in his soul. He would sooner read the song to you in Malay, that Italian of the East. But here is the translation.
I think for the sake of our workshop time, we may have to skip the last little bit of this section and then go ahead to group 4.
Okay, let me just wrap up here. But I'll just tell the story. In the short of it, and the women of Badur came out of their houses, and with pity they saw poor Saija standing there, for they recognized him and realized that he was looking for Adinda's house. And they knew there was no house for Adinda's in the village of Badur. For when the district of Parangkujang took the buffalo, Adinda's father died of a heartbreak. Her sister had died because no mother to suckle her. And Adinda's father had fled the country and had taken Adinda with him and her brothers. But he heard of how Saija's father had punished him with rattan stripes, and so that's why he left. Okay, I'll leave it there.
Thank you. And now group 4, go ahead, Cheryl. Thank you very much, Alan.
Okay, I'm here. Can you hear me? Okay. So Saija is stunned upon learning that Adinda's family had to flee. He's stunned to the point where he can't speak. And so he's being thought of as demented, and a woman takes him into her house. When he recovers his speech, he went to the house and only found a remnant of the wall where Adinda had hung her dress at night. So he steps out to travel to places where he knows these people who have had their buffaloes stolen and cannot pay their rent are hiding. He travels by buffalo and then by ship until he finds a place where the Dutch are fighting. The Dutch army is raiding a village. He comes to this village and finds that the village is village is burning, and he comes across the burning bodies of Adinda's family and eventually Adinda herself. She has been horribly abused, and in response, Saija rushes at the Dutch army until he is killed by a bayonet. As a result of all of the Dutch army's victory, there was great rejoicing in Batavia over the Dutch victory. At this point, Max stops his story. Havelar, is that how you say it? Stops his story and reflects on it. He says that although the story is fiction, he can prove that there were many Adindas and many Saijas, and that what is fiction in particular is truth in general. He says he knows the dates, the times, the places, the names of many such incidences that he could prove. But he says that instead of giving these particulars, he doesn't do that because it would only end up in the courts. And his purpose for this story is to have it appeal to the hearts of people. So he says, even if it's a fiction, it doesn't make it, he continues to argue that even if it's fiction, it doesn't make the underlying theme untrue. He accuses the Dutch of not understanding the humanity of their natives, and he calls on the Dutch to admit that the ill treatment of the native is outrageous. In bold letters, outrageous. That's it.
Thank you so much, everyone, for these really thoughtful readings and really thoughtful dramatizations. That was thought-provoking. I know we are already over time by about 9 or 10 minutes, but I would suggest, why don't we take 4 or 5 last minutes, just if there's any final comments or final thoughts about this experience, about this historical information. If you have a burning comment, please share it. And Chris is going to moderate this final discussion together.
Okay. So thank you, Nina. So maybe the German group, if there's still some Germans who would like to restitute a bit what you have discussed.
Ja, genau.
Wo soll ich sitzen?
Hier. Ah, so, aber genau, die Christine kann nur in unsere Richtung übersetzen, also auf Englisch am besten.
Ja, das Englisch.
Oder konsekutiv, dann mache ich.
Nee, okay. Ich muss bloß wissen, wie. Okay. Well, we talked about how we can relate to what was the topic of the story of Max Havelaar and the colonialism and the oppression and so on. And of course, we, being a German group, we remembered that Germany has also a colonial history in Africa, Namibia, and the violent, die Niederschlagung des Herero-Aufstandes, this is a lot to reflect and to repent on. So this was something where we talked about, and we also wondered whether our Indonesian brothers and sisters, how they think and feel about what we discussed today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much. Maybe I can just ask a general question. What do you think about the role of, let's say, literature and a story like this about Saija and Sadinda in the effort to overcome injustice? Do we need stories, or is political action better, or praying maybe better than a story? How do you see this?
Well, I was living in Indonesia at the time when the Max Havelaar movie came out.
Mm-hmm.
The movie was strongly condemned and it was banned. And also the book, then I found out the book itself had been banned by the Suharto government. And the reason was that the Suharto government basically had replaced the colonial government of the Dutch.
Mm-hmm.
And it was extremely sensitive because it exposed the aristocracy, people that would be considered aristocrats. And so it was a powerful book. And I'm also thinking of other books which exposed the current government because the current government had basically replaced the Dutch colonial government as a colonial power within, because they had retained all the old the colonial legal system and were using it for their own benefit.
Yeah, very, very clear story, and it's already in the book of Max Havelaar, this system of divide et impera. So the Dutch colonizer used the Indonesian or elite to oppress the local people. So in a sense, it's also a story about hypocrisy. Are there any other thoughts about the role of literature and stories in creating justice? As we have 1 minute to go, maybe you have another spontaneous reaction or a question or thought to share?
I would like to tell something about what we received, what we discussed in our German-speaking group. Christina, you need not to translate because we all hear German. Not a German in this moment. Sorry. You're doing a great job, by the way. Language is a question of identity, and literature, in this meaning, gives a kind of an identity. And if we look to Luther, he gave the German society a kind of identity. If we look to Finland and Nordic countries, it was not the Bible who gave the identity, it was the translation of historical sagas, as they say. So the literature has a specific thing to bring in an identity for a society. And so if you told that every children in the Netherlands know about this story, I have never heard it before from it. But it's the same for us. We have also such kind of stories that give us a kind of identity. And I think this helps for people to feel and to express something. It's the same with songs. Yeah, if you look to our society, we have songs from the left wing or John Baez or whomever you take, John Lennon or Leonard Cohen or whoever. They give a special identity, and I think this is the main thing. Is one part of the thing what we discussed. And the question is still, this one is up, what Andrea already said. How do the people nowadays, brothers and sisters in Indonesia, see their own colonialism?
Yeah.
So
yeah.
Just that.
Thank you very much. And how do we deal then with this double-sidedness of stories and identities? Because the same effect of stories on identities could also work out negatively and promote violence. Eliana.
And I would add that it's not like only the two-sidedness of the stories itself or what's inherent in the story, but also like how we read it and how the reading of it is used and how the telling of it is used.
Yeah, thank you. Nina, how do you see this double-sidedness of stories with regard to the desire for peace and justice?
I think it can be a really strong tool because it affords the chance. I love that line. I think Cheryl, you mentioned it too. What is fiction in particular is truth in general. And this idea that fiction gives us a tool to talk about really hard truths in a way that we can't in our own voices sometimes, or that it gains credibility because it's not a singular voice, it's a story. And people who are sort of complicit in systems of violence, or this offers another lens that is a bit more palatable if we're caught up in systems that are bad. It's easier to be made aware of what's wrong and to spark change and to spark empathy. So I definitely agree that we should keep using literature as a good tool.
Okay. Yeah, Eliane.
I think there's also danger of asking for literature or for the general instead of the particular, and instead of asking for art instead of like justice in a different way, in a around like the politics of who asks for a story and who uses the story how and who has access to the story.
About art and engagement, there's a little ironic moment in the story of Saidja and Sadinda at the moment where the narrator refers to an Indonesian, let's say Indonesian painter, Sadar Raden, if I remember his name. Well, it was a very famous painter, an Indonesian, who came to Holland and was more or less, yes, a star in Holland at the time. And the whole story about the buffalo and the tiger, Multatuli, so the writer took it from a painting. It's a way of bringing or bridging a story to the reality of his own time. And he does that in a very, very clever way, I think. So there is it. Yeah, thank you, Nina. So it's art and art. They are communicating with each other as if they are showing a reality that is more real than the reality we know about in our daily lives. That's what I like about Max Havelaar. And his influence up till today is very great, as we heard already. Some names like Droogstoppel, it's an invented name, but it has entered a daily life language. A Droogstoppel is a person like Droogstoppel. Everybody knows what it means to be a Droogstoppel. So that's also the power of language and imagination, long-term inspiration for the combat or the desire for justice and peace, I would say.
Well, I wonder what the role of art in this case, the Raden Saleh pictures, paintings, but also the Max Havelaar story, how it would help in our dialogue with Indonesians. Because art is a bridge. It's a medium between two, can be a medium between two cultures. Indonesians can help us understand the story, and also the dynamics behind it. My wife is Indonesian, and I'm very conscious that Indonesians, it's much easier to talk indirectly than directly.
Yeah.
And the story helps us to access what is truth, but in an indirect way that would link. So I think because we're talking about decolonization, And how does art help us in the decolonization effort?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. And there's I see some parallel between talking about the absolute, talking about God, and communicating in an indirect way, because every talking about the absolute is indirectness in a certain sense. And the role of the metaphors and the parable, the parables in the New Testament is maybe also comparable to such a story like Saïdja and Adinda. For the matter of time, is there something you would like to share? If not, I hand over the hammer of the session to Nina again for a last word. Okay, Nina, symbolically, I hand over the hammer to you.
All right. I think I wanted to thank you all again for your enthusiastic participation and your willingness to go out on a limb and try this readers' theater with us. I know it feels a little bit scary sometimes to do something like that, but I think what you brought to this session was really fantastic and thought-provoking. As we said before, this is being recorded, so I'll try and get a copy of that to send to each of you if that's possible somehow, so you can have that whole story as a souvenir of this. And aside from that, I wish you all a really fascinating World Conference online experience. And I hope we'll have a chance to meet in person sometime at some Mennonite event here or there, somewhere in the world. We really are glad that you joined us here today.